there's a certain type of business owner who absolutely loves saying, but they signed the contract, and technically they may be right. The customer signed it, the fine print does cover this situation. The business may have every legal right to enforce it, but that doesn't automatically make it a smart business decision. I hear contractors talk about the fine print like they've discovered some brilliant loophole. The customer probably didn't read it, but they signed it. Well, okay, congratulations, Perry Mason. You just won, $300 and bought yourself a pissed off customer, a 1-star review, and a story they'll probably tell everybody they know. It seems like a hell of a trade. Contracts are important. They establish the scope of the work. They explain, payment expectations. They protect the contractor from customers who change the project halfway through, refuse to pay, or expect 15 extra things that were never included. A good contract protects both sides when something goes wrong. What it should not be is a trap. It should not be written so you can point to paragraph 17 and say, well, technically I'm allowed to screw you. That mentality might get you through one argument, but it's a terrible way to build a company. There's a difference between protecting your business and squeezing every dollar you can out of someone because the paperwork says you can. Sometimes the customer's clearly wrong. Sometimes they approved the work, received exactly what they paid for, now they're trying to avoid paying the bill. I'm not saying you should let customers walk all over you. I'm not saying every complaint deserves a refund, and I'm definitely not saying contracts should be ignored. I am saying that you should look at the entire situation before automatically reaching for the fine print. Was the customer genuinely confused? Did your salesperson explain the agreement clearly? Did something change that, neither side expected? Did your company make a mistake? Is there a reasonable compromise that preserves the relationship without seriously hurting your business? And most importantly, is enforcing this provision really worth what it could cost your reputation? Local service businesses live and die by trust. People check your reviews. They ask their neighbors about you. They post in local Facebook groups. They tell their friends and family whether you're fair when something went wrong. Your contract might win the argument. It cannot stop the customer from telling everyone that dealing with your company was miserable. And before someone says, well, we can respond to the review and explain, sure you can. But, imagine reading the response as a potential customer. The customer says they feel like they were treated unfairly, and your response is basically, too bad, they should have read the fine print. Does that make your company look trustworthy? Or does it make every potential customer wonder what you might be hiding in the contract? The businesses that think this way usually develop a pattern. They're constantly arguing with customers. They blame every bad review or situation on an unreasonable person. They believe everybody's trying to rip them off. And they keep changing company names, starting over, wondering why their reputation keeps following them. At some point, you have to consider the common denominator. Now, being flexible doesn't make you weak. Making a reasonable expectation does not mean every customer gets to demand whatever they want. It means you understand that the long-term value of your reputation is usually worth more than squeezing a few $100s out of one disagreement. There's absolutely going to be times when you need to enforce the contract. If the customer refuses to pay for completed work, damages your equipment, repeatedly changes the scope, or just deliberately violates a clear agreement, protect yourself. It's what the contract's for. But if your first response to every disagreement is they signed it, you're probably relying on paperwork to compensate for poor communication, bad judgment, and or an unwillingness to treat people fairly. A signature proves that an agreement exists. It does not prove you communicated well, doesn't prove that your company handled the situation correctly, and it definitely doesn't mean enforcing every last sentence is good for business. The best companies use contracts as protection when they genuinely need them. The worst companies use contracts as weapons and then act surprised when customers stop trusting them. You may be legally right. You may be able to collect the money. You may even win the argument. But if you damage your reputation in the process, what exactly did you win?